leaders and the public interest bar, lender servicer bar, city agencies, the local bar association all worked as a steering committee came together to oversee the program. This deliberative body remains in force as the stewards of the program. It was a pilot program with a small p, which grew to a capital P, and now has no P moniker. We built it, they came, and they continue to come to be in a forum which permits real dialogue and conciliation to find sustainable solutions between distressed homeowners and their lender servicers, to keep Philadelphians in their homes and out of homelessness. Philly Save Your Home Hotline provided the portal to the diversion program to triage cases and best direct assistance to those in need of real-time guidance, the gauntlet of often a challenging court system. With the unparalleled network of exceptional housing counselors who continue to walk the walk with those most in need, whether it be accessing direct mortgage assistance by way of modifications or deferral, linkage to needed social services, or guidance through a court process, the mantra has never changed: to save homes one address at a time. I should say through this program, the specialties of the demographics of those we help, right? It would be older Americans, those who are challenged physically, those who are of the military, those who have language barriers. Those were the things that we were able in a drill down to address and actually sustain in homes. It is a mandatory program for owner-occupied properties upon the filing of a foreclosure matter. The conciliation date is issued at the initial filing, and therein begins the process. It activates with a call to the hotline where a homeowner is connected through focused triage by incredible members of a hotline staffed by Philadelphia Legal Assistance. Since inception, nothing has been left to chance. In partnership with neighborhood organizations and others, door knocks are given to homeowners to call attention to the need for these homeowners to call a hotline to start the process. It's that human-to-human contact to get people activated, which has been key to the process. Calls are screened to determine assignments of certain housing counselors. Therein begins the forged relationship between housing counselors and distressed homeowners. Once in session, meaningful dialogue about resolutions, or particularly for certain households, bring about results. Those who rent in Philadelphia average almost half the population and are most vulnerable post-COVID to lose housing from unemployment, overriding already pre-existing financial burdens. Judicial moratoria have frozen eviction practice for the moment, with an estimated backlog of 5,000 eviction cases, the challenge of the city's municipal court to adjudicate in a timely and judicious manner. When the courts do open, and that is anticipated within weeks. I do salute the court leaders who are exploring ways to meet this challenge on all fronts, both for health safety and also to adjudicate these cases. Philadelphia City Council has moved forward, and as in other jurisdictions, has passed emergency legislation for rental relief and other support. So this week, there will be a vote on an Emergency Housing Protection Act, which provides several relief options with rental assistance, as well as a pre-filing diversion program. Taking a chapter from the Mortgage Foreclosure Diversion Program, the construct would have the portal of a tenant hotline, which already exists, triage cases, and assist in connecting tenants to housing counselors who would work to develop financial arrangements and conciliation talks with landlords. The hope would be to provide sustainable solutions to keep tenants in their housing and out of homelessness. Sound familiar? The beauty of such a program would be to provide early intervention to sustain a tenancy for distressed citizens while providing a portal for relief for distressed landlords as well, who are burdened under lockdown and social public service unit. The lateral fallout of massive evictions would drive landlords into unforeseen foreclosure. A diversion program would be a gateway to assistance for funds and programs to maintain their properties. And here is the big and connect them with services if needed to keep their properties maintained and out of foreclosure as well. It's a win-win. It is a postponement with purpose that could still meet the goals of reducing caseloads in a sustainable way, well within the guidelines of court management timelines. seen it work in the past, and I believe it can work now. So here is the bottom line. An insatiable need has been more than demonstrated. As relief funds become available on the local level from federal and state grants to diversion programs, such a program could provide immediate holistic treatment of rent deficiencies to get to the root cause of delinquencies and bridge those deficiencies with linkage to other appropriate services and resources. Grants of money without counseling and realistic agreements, in my opinion, do not solve long-term issues. The mission should be clear: stabilizing housing for renters and properties where there is an ability to pay on a sustainable basis in a habitable property. Only then can we begin to stabilize communities one block at a time, one neighborhood at a time, one city and region at a time, as we punch through this extraordinary challenging lives. So here's my punch list to consider when establishing a diversion program. Find a champion to lead the charge with others to follow. And I think Michigan has shown that with our board president here today. Tend to your own garden, the laws, your court system, the programs and resources to come together to work as a functioning ecosystem. But all things are local, and only you know best what would work in your garden. Create and maintain a group of stakeholders from all sides of the issue to act as the stewards of a program they created. Landlords can benefit as much as tenants, an activity to valuable resources, and as such, must have a voice of leadership and ownership of a diversion program. Data, data, data. In Philadelphia, we had the benefit of the Reinvestment Fund, a respected independent think tank, to track data from the mortgage program in 2008, 2014, and then in most recent years with the eviction scenario and landscape in Philadelphia. And their work has been impressive and really has led the discussions that have been the underpinnings of developing legislation that City Council is dealing with now. And I will be leaving links to the TRF studies with Danielle for others to access. I do recommend you go to their site. Data, data, data. It will prop you up, it will sustain you, and make your existence actually something that is not only just a pilot, but something that could be really embedded in an established court system or pre-filing system. And the last point is continue to listen, observe, and learn from the program with an open mind and heart. Be able to pivot where necessary with the mission to always improve the program and increase inclusiveness and participation. So, in ending, I want to give a shout out to the Mayor's Office in Philadelphia, the City Council, Councilwoman Ginn and Jennifer Cates have really helped to really lead this charge. Court leadership, our PJ, Ivy Fox in Philadelphia, the wonderful housing community in Philadelphia, Rachel Garland, who was just mentioned today in a New York Times article at CLS, who's leading the charge, and others who are present. I will leave that data with in contact with Danielle for further notice. I really do appreciate the platform to talk and to celebrate and to really challenge everyone to really stop and rethink the programs that exist that can be an impetus to start new ones. New issues, new ideas with old and dogged problems. Only now everything is on steroids. So I'd like the opportunity and appreciate to share thoughts and lessons learned from the mortgage program. We are in extraordinary times. Extraordinary times to get extraordinary response. And that response, as I say when I end every speech I give throughout all these years, may the force be with all of us. So thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Judge Rizzo. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes sharing some new national guidance that the Conference of Chief Justices and Conference of State Court Administrators have recently promulgated and released today, relating to high-volume dockets, eviction being an example of it. This document is available in the materials on the website for this webinar. There are 7 recommendations or 7 considerations. The first is both as it relates to social distancing, but also in consideration of court users' other competing demands on their time. It's an encouragement to make hearings remote as much as possible, but being mindful of the digital divide, so as to not make the remote appearance a further hindrance to participation. To that end, the second recommendation is that courts consider not only the hearing itself being remote, but think about all of the pre-hearing procedural requirements that take place, from remote filing to civil fee waiver process or payment of court fees to electronic signatures and digital notaries, or even attestations in penalty of perjury in lieu of having a notary requirement. Sorry. Okay, the next recommendation relates to traditionally high volume dockets, as we all know, had many parties scheduled at one single time in packed courtrooms. Because of both because of social distancing, but also efficiency, this no longer makes sense. And so the recommendation is instead to schedule these in much smaller batches. The conference notes that because these are likely handled remotely, judicial officers and staff should review court files in advance of the hearing to be the most prepared when the hearings take place. The fourth consideration is that in the jurisdictions that have already reopened, they've seen participation increase because of participation. And it's too early to draw too fine of a conclusion on this, but just to note that a lot of these cases, traditionally high volume dockets, had a decent default rate, and that participation may increase and technology may be a leveler for encouraging involvement, all of which to say that this may make mass calendaring even less tenable. The topic that we're mainly going to speak about today, so I've drawn it with a star, is the diversion programs. The idea that your judicial officer's time and court hearings are a really precious resource. And so courts should explore different kinds of programs and screening to ensure pre-hearing resolution of disputes where it makes sense. So in this instance, we're going to talk at great length about Michigan's eviction diversion program, but online dispute resolution or other kinds of pre-filing ADR may make sense. The sixth recommendation was to consider, in especially high volume case types such as these, that judges and retired judges and pro tem judges be reassigned so that they can spend the time necessary to hear the cases that will likely come. And finally, but no less importantly, just because these cases may be part of a large backlog or may be done remotely doesn't mean that procedural fairness principles shouldn't be applied in all of those cases, or put affirmatively, courts should still prioritize procedural fairness in these traditionally high volume dockets. And that includes both the hearing itself, but in all of the instructions leading up to the hearing, including plain language instruction about the technology and the platform so people are able to participate. As a bit of context, as we all know, we know that many jurisdictions across the country have eviction moratoria that are ending very soon. It has been estimated that 50 million renters have suffered some loss of income due to the pandemic, and that 40% of those job losses have occurred in low-income households. And our next and final poll is going to be next, so which is, we're curious whether you are in a jurisdiction that is still under an eviction moratorium, and if so, when it expires. You can please take 1 minute and complete this. That would be helpful for us. Thank you. Anthony, can you please share the results from this poll? So it looks overwhelmingly 94% of those who are joining us today are still operating under an eviction moratorium, and it looks like almost half of our participants have eviction moratoria that are expiring within the month, and then a month and 2 months make up the next largest percentage. So thank you. For those who either don't know or want to see how their jurisdiction compares with others, I wanted to point out a specific resource on the National Center's pandemic website that tracks and lists all of the orders across the country. So thank you to Paula Hanifer Agor for putting this together, and please feel free to take a look at your convenience. It would be remiss in this moment if I didn't also mention the potential racial dynamics that occur with evictions, and we know from studies pre-pandemic that eviction is often experienced overwhelmingly by people of color, and that the single biggest demographic group that it affected before the pandemic was single parents, most commonly African American single parents, and that there often has also been a number of studies that have shown a disproportionately high relationship with domestic violence victims and also families with young children. And also that eviction has a serious relationship with a cycle of poverty, that people who have an eviction order often have a much more difficult time finding a new landlord or rental company to rent to them, and when they do, it often can have additional fees and hurdles acquired, and not only that, but the collateral consequences of being ineligible for future public housing. It can also have negative effects on employment, health, family stability, and schooling. So as we all know, it's a deeply serious topic. Pre-pandemic, I just wanted to highlight kind of three core elements of what I think make up good diversion programs, which are: one, that there is visibility and accessibility for people who actually need the help in crisis, to know there's something for them to reach out to, that there's a coordination among all of the players, as you'll see with the Michigan example so brilliantly in a few minutes. And then finally, that there are supportive both there are policies and statutes and rules that allow the diversion program to resolve the most common disputes. So those are the kind of core elements that you'll see in the Michigan program as a through line. I would also note these are the three kind of core elements that were true pre and post pandemic, but they also are going to have to take place now during the pandemic. So all of this now has to work with social distancing and often remotely. So it's not unlike how Grace Kelly is doing the dance, but now she's also doing it in high heels and backwards. Finally, my final piece is to share a little bit of information about potential funding sources. And again, my guess is that you will hear about this much more detail in a few minutes from Michigan. But partnering and collaborating both the courts together with legal aid and other partners has probably never been more important. Many jurisdictions had pre-pandemic housing preservation programs that either helped tenants with eviction and foreclosure, and they were likely funded through general operations, but even they often weren't meeting all of the need. And now, as we are likely facing an onslaught of eviction and foreclosure courts, we need to think about ways to increase capacity here. I wanted to share just a couple of specific resources. The first is the National Center did a tiny chat with Karen Lash, and the link is below, where she talked about how states can approach pass-through federal funding, meaning federal funding streams that are administered by state agencies. So the funds go where determined by state decision makers. She also prepared a grants matrix, which is here, and it's also in the materials for this webinar, that include specific information as to figure out who your state administrator is for each of these specific agencies. So we encourage you to check out both of those resources. And finally, the two tips that come out of that grants matrix that we urge you to take a look at are the CARES Act and the Corona Relief Fund, as well as the Community Development Block Grants. The CARES Act authorized many funding streams to deal with the impact of the pandemic. And the biggest of those funds goes to every state Tribe, Territory, and the District of Columbia, and it's called the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and the funds must be spent by December 30th. So we encourage you to have conversations with your local or state policymakers to get a share of those funds. And as long as the funds are incurred because of the public health emergency, and we would argue the emergency in housing courts certainly meets that definition, it's an eligible expense. So expenses to respond to the eviction and foreclosure crisis, for the development of technology tools, online information, hearing needs, and self-help, to the legal aid, direct legal aid for those who need it to qualify, may be worth exploring. And the other thing to note is that as part of the CARES Act, there was additional money from the community development and block grant funds. So there's another important source of funding during this time. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Judge Boyd, who's going to lead us in the Michigan case study. So Judge Boyd, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Danielle. My name is Tom Boyd. I recently became the state court administrator in Michigan. However, I spent the last 14 and a half years as a limited jurisdiction judge in mid-Michigan, handling a general docket, but included landlord-tenant cases. I'm really pleased to have with me today Ms. Elizabeth Rios from Legal Services of South Central Michigan, who began that program with me, and she still is working in that program, making it work today. We also have with us Sam Buckholter and Dana Sherry from Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer's office, and we're going to do a couple things. We're going to start with talking about what the eviction diversion is. We're going to talk about some data, which we believe evidences that it works. And then we're going to talk about how to scale up or expand an eviction diversion program to a statewide approach in response to COVID-19. The bulk of the data on the program working in Michigan is going to come from Ms. Rios. We'll then go over to the folks from Governor Whitmer's office to talk about their plans to extend the social safety net. And I'll then talk about the Michigan State Supreme Court's plan to create an environment for win-win scenarios in landlord-tenant cases across Michigan. May we have the first slide, please, Danielle? So our presentation begins much with the same content as Judge Rizzo and Danielle, Ms. Hirsch, and that is to talk about, look, we understand that the negative consequences of an eviction are not few and they're deep. The negative consequences obviously include potential homelessness, but they include issues having to do with current employment, long-term employment. Evictions often, and in Michigan, they include a judgment, which is a negative mark on your credit, which is going to affect your housing ability and your credit ability for a very long period of time. Social support networks that exist to provide support for your family, whether that's childcare or other support, also break down if you are relocated. This is an educational problem. Many years ago, I was a PTA president, and our biggest problem was the transient nature of the population. Because in one elementary school in the city, you might learn a certain set of skills in second grade and have to move every single year, and 2 or 3 years in a row, may find the same set of skills in the preceding years in the school. So everything from curriculum alignment to hunger and low birth weight. So the idea, and you can see this data, the data here we have sharing here comes from one of our eviction diversion programs, from the study of the effect of their program. And you can see that the use of primary care goes up when people have housing stability, which of course has a commensurate reduction in emergency care. We're talking about children's health. So again, this is not just about housing. The housing ripple effect goes to all other parts of what we, the criminal side might call a recovery-oriented system of care for people who are struggling. Danielle, next slide. So, just for some context, you know how evictions work in your state, but to understand our presentation, I want to tell you just a little bit about ours. The legislation governing eviction cases is called summary proceedings, and the court rule, which procedurally implements the statute, is also called summary proceedings. I'm emphasizing that because, wow, these are summary proceedings. So if a lawyer wanted to sue someone for $1,000 in Michigan, you'd need to have personal service, 21 days to respond, and when there's a response, there'd be a pretrial sometime. In an eviction case, you can take someone's home for an arrearage of rent of $1,000, that same $1,000. By knocking on their door 3 times, and the third time they don't answer, you post the eviction notice it's a summons a complaint that you post on the door. The hearing is set within 10 days, and if they don't show up, they're defaulted. They have 10 days to pay the arrearage, or they're out. If they do show up, they're going to have a trial that day, under most circumstances. Now, good people like Ms. Rios might get in the way and ask them for adjournment to understand their rights and understand their problems, but in far too many communities, that's not a reality. So summary means something. What does that have to do with what we're talking about today? What it has to do with today is that if we just took the number of evictions in April, May, and June of a normal year, we roughly average about 17,000 evictions a year. So that's around 50,000, a little more than 50,000 evictions. We're able to extrapolate from data back in 2009, when we were in the last time we were in a housing crisis, and using that data in this period of time, we think we could see as high as 75,000 evictions. Anecdotally, people are telling us that the federal and state government efforts to increase unemployment insurance benefits and other measures taken by the Michigan legislature and the Whitmer administration may stem that number and greatly reduce it. But again, we've missed 3 months. Our moratorium lifts on June 30th, at least that's the current plan. That could be 50,000 cases landing in the courts of limited jurisdiction in Michigan in the first 2 weeks of July. So, with that as a backdrop, what is eviction diversion? As I introduced Ms. Rios, I want to let you know that eviction diversion is generally a court establishing timelines and procedures to allow the social safety net to work. That's really all it is. Sometimes courts don't play well with others, but an interdisciplinary approach to eviction cases really can provide a win-win result for everyone. In a non-payment of rent case, the landlord wants the rent. The tenant usually wants to pay the rent. There are numerous programs that go on all the time. Whether they're in Michigan, Department of Health and Human Services has state emergency relief funds that may step in and help. But there are tons of philanthropical avenues that also may step in and assist that plaintiff and that defendant to a win-win resolution. The question is, will we slow down enough to find that victory for everybody? So, eviction diversion programs, I think I'm going to turn this over to Ms. Rios. Ms. Rios, you're going to pick up here, I think, talk about how eviction diversion effectively makes changes in the negative outcomes that we started with.
Yes. Thank you, Judge Boyd. So I think the question then is, so what does an eviction diversion program do? And first and foremost, it prevents homelessness. Like Judge Boyd said, it's an interdisciplinary approach to preventing homelessness, which is a win-win for everybody. I think everyone can get behind the fact that we don't want homelessness. It reduces eviction totals and eviction rates. It prevents costs to community. I think it's very well known that providing 1 month's rent assistance is dwarfed by the amount of money that it costs to shelter a household or a family for 1 month. And so it just makes good financial sense on top of wanting to prevent homelessness for moral reasons. It helps facilitate outcomes with landlords and resolves outstanding rent. It resolves other landlord-tenant disputes, tries to mend a landlord-tenant relationship, which can easily get off course due to repairs or due to non-payment. It helps to enforce tenants' rights by providing legal assistance and access to justice for tenants. It maintains housing stability and increases the quality of housing. I think that this is a really key component that can be a very attractive element to communities generally, because institution of these programs can impact the way that landlords approach filings and it can impact the ability for municipal ordinances regarding co-compliance to also play a big role. When a tenant is receiving legal advice, all of those things can be checked. Is the property certified as a rental property? Are there repair issues? And just simply asking those questions and helping to resolve any dispute along those lines between a tenant and a landlord can really improve quality affordable housing in a community. And it can also be a model for something similar to a civil rights council. If legal aid is on site and offering to assist every single tenant that comes to the courthouse, then that can operate as a civil rights council-ish type of model. And I think that those are the best kind of models. There's lots of variations within the state that we'll talk a little bit about, but I think as close as you can get to that, the more impactful it can be. And so the benefits and the barriers for these programs, the benefits are representation. And I think I think there was like 30% legal aid programs that are on this webinar. So when you're thinking about these programs, consider the staff that you want to work the programs, because it's very much thinking on your feet. It's very much like an organized chaos, but that is very impactful and can be a really good use of legal aid resources. And it's really a wraparound follow-up. So there's the legal aspect, and then there's also the social service agency, financial assistance, relocation assistance piece to it, which is the part that ensures eviction prevention. The benefit is that there's no judgment. Programs, eviction diversion programs, largely use settlement agreements or conditional dismissals. It maintains the credit and rental history of the tenant, so a tenant can, in the future, continue to receive affordable and quality housing. It provides education for tenants and landlords, I believe, over time. When you have a community program, and I want to stress that these are community programs, that it very much is an education for landlords, tenants, and communities. And as I said before, the community impact. I think that for landlords, for the housing stock, for the courts, it can be a win, as Judge Boyd said, for all parties involved. But there are some barriers. The courts could be barriers. Sometimes new programs, there can be some pushback on that. And I think that any court that is interested might be even more interested in looking at data for programs that have been successful, might be interested in talking to another court that has instituted a program, and maybe discuss any concerns or issues that they could foresee when starting a model in their own court. The private landlord bar could also be a barrier, and so I think it's really important on the front end to explain the program, the benefit to landlords, and for the court to kind of make that step of including landlords in the discussion, and possibly in the way that you model it in your specific district court. And funding. I think funding specifically for legal aid programs is a barrier. And so I think that when you're approaching that specific barrier, you try to look and see what are the resources in your community. And in the current circumstances we're under right now, there is some additional funding. So maybe kind of take hold of that and say, I'm going to seize this moment for this program, and use COVID ESG or COVID CDBG grant money, or maybe some other grant money that your state might provide. And so what do models look like? I really want to stress that models look different. They will look different from one county to the next. They'll look different from one community to another. They'll even look different from one district court within the same county as another. We have had two programs in Ingham County, and there are some similarities and then there are some differences. And so I think that that's important to note, that when you are thinking about how to model a program for your community, that you don't feel constrained that it has to look one way or that it has to be one way. Feel empowered to make it fit your geographic location, make it fit your resources, and how it can best impact your community. And I can say that there's several different models in Michigan. There's models in Jackson, in Kalamazoo, in Detroit. I think there's even some a little bit in northern Michigan. And they all look different, and that's okay. But for today, we're going to focus on the programs that I worked on with Judge Boyd and our program in Lansing. And I really have to give credit to the 8th District Court out in Kalamazoo, who was the very first court to institute an eviction diversion program. And when I got a call from Judge Boyd and Director Sewell and Holbrook, who is our Ingham County DHHS director, saying, you know, we're interested in this thing they're doing out in Kalamazoo, let's go take a look. And I said, yeah, let's do it. And so we went out to Kalamazoo, we looked at their program, and we thought, wow, this is really innovative, this is really creative. How can we make this work in Ingham County in the 55th District? And so we came back and we started planning, and we started saying, okay, what needs to happen to make this work? And the court did really 4 specific things to change its process when it decided, yes, we want to do this program. It stopped using the 5-day rule, which probably legal aid programs are familiar with. It scheduled all the landlord-tenant cases on the same day. It held a local bar meeting for the private bar and legal aid to explain the program and roll it out so that everybody knew what was coming, hopefully getting buy-in, answering questions and concerns about the program that anybody might have. And it developed forms for us to use originally as a settlement agreement, and then we changed it to conditional dismissals. And it also attached a flyer. So when we instituted the program, the court began to attach a flyer to the summons that it issued that were then served to the tenants, which included a pretty complete list of resources that were available in the community, as well as contact information, so that they would hopefully start the process of eviction diversion even prior to coming to court. Now, that works in some cases, but still many times tenants on the day of court are really facing their court date, facing their eviction prospect for the first time. And so another thing that the court did is agree to send legal services a docket prior to the days that we would be on site for the hearings, so that we would be able to do a conflict check and do a couple other things that you legal aid, people that are watching know that we have to do for LSC regulations. And then on the day of court, it is very much, I think, organized chaos, but it's beautiful and it's impactful, and it is very deliberate, it's very intentional. I think if someone comes in to observe, which many other states have come to take a look at our program, they think, whoa, this is a lot going on. But it is very deliberate, it's very calculated, and it is truly organized. And so the way it works on the day of the hearing is there's a check-in point. As the tenant comes in, legal aid is on site with our partners, MSU Housing Clinic, which are a wonderful partner of a law school. And the tenant is checked in, they're asked if they want to speak to a lawyer. And if they do want to speak to a lawyer, they're assigned to an attorney or a student under the supervision of an attorney, either through MSU or through legal aid. Then once we meet with the tenant, we assess if there are defenses, if it's solely a financial issue, if there are fee issues, if there are repair issues, if there are fair housing issues, whatever the defense might be, or if there's not. And we will be on the spot negotiating with the landlord, trying to resolve the case. Simultaneously, the tenant is trying to become eligible for financial assistance through DHS and the Coordinated Entry Agency, who are also on site. So we have legal assistance on site through legal aid and MSU Housing at MSU Law School. And we also have DHS and the CA agency on site for financial assistance. And I think that the on-site point is really important to really serve as a wraparound approach to eviction diversion. And so all of this is happening at the same time. And at the end, hopefully we're able to resolve the case with the landlord. And we put the conditional dismissal, previously settlement agreement, on the record. And then that once that conditional dismissal is entered, it gets dismissed in 90 days if no action is taken. Then it will not appear on the tenant's credit. It will not appear as a judgment on the credit's rental history. And if it's not complied with, then the landlord will enter a default judgment and a writ of eviction all at the same time, submitted to the court, which the court will then sign all at the same time. And if it's not able to be resolved along those lines, then we either have the hearing right there on site, on the spot, or it's set for a date for a future hearing. But the vast majority of the cases we're able to settle there the day of the hearing or within a week of the hearing. And that might be different for different jurisdictions. that might be more litigious. Some areas there might be more repair issues or termination issues. But through our experience, the vast majority of the cases we are able to settle. And I want to note that there's really some important things to make the program successful, and I think that is court investment. I think the court backing the program and for the entire bench to know that this is what the court is doing is really important. And I think it's also really important from a legal assistance perspective that the model can assist every tenant that is wanting an attorney. I think that that's really important to have the most impact and to be the most effective. And so we have some data from what we have done over the course of September 2012 when we first started to 2018 when the data collection took place. And so this is just showing evictions. And the court averaged 520 evictions per year during the pre-EDP phase, pre-September 2012, and then 354 per year during post-EDP from 2013 to 2018. And the percent change of average evictions from pre-EDP to post-EDP is a decrease of 32%. And I think that that's a significant data point. We also have some data on new filings and evictions. And so it kind of just shows the ebb of filings, and the filings have been down, that they never reached the pre-EDP level of filings. And I think that is, I think that that's due to the program. I think that plaintiffs are maybe more careful about filing when they know that those filings could possibly be challenged, and they don't want to waste their money. And if they know that the program could benefit them, then they will definitely try to file and be part of the program, which has really proven successful for a lot of plaintiffs. And then kind of in conjunction with that, new filings is the percent of evictions of new filings, which is a companion slide. And then we go to the average percent of evictions per new filing. And so this shows a reduction of 19.3%, controlling for overall reduction, and the amount directly is attributed to EDP. We then have some data on default judgments. And so default judgments have been down consistently post-EDP. And I like to attribute that to hopefully tenants knowing, being advised of the resources that are available to them through the flyer that's attached to the summons, and knowing that there's going to be resources at court as well as legal assistance available to every tenant at court. And then finally, the slide that I am most proud of is the percent of settlement or conditional dismissals that actually default after entering. And you can see that that is a very low percentage. So from January of 2014 through October 31st of 2018, there were 1,889 settlement agreements that were entered. And of those agreements, default judgments were entered on only 489 of those cases, which is, roughly 25%. And so 75% avoided judgment because of this program, because of the settlement/conditional dismissal. And I think that that's a really important slide, a really important data point that I think if a court is considering maybe doing this, maybe not, then let's show the data to show that it works. And then I wanted to go to just mention our other program in Ingham County, which was a pilot program that took place from September to December of 2017 in Lansing 54A District Court, which is also in Ingham County, but encompasses the city of Lansing, whereas the 55th District is primarily the out-county areas and the cities surrounding Lansing. But we modeled the program in Lansing after the program in Mason. And there was, obviously some small changes because Lansing is different, the number of judges is different, the demographics are different. But largely it was modeled after our approach in Mason. And Legal Aid, as well as MSU Housing, they were also a partner with us in this program, as well as DHS and the CEA agency, which is Holy Cross Services, then VOA. And then we had a couple additional partners in Lansing through Code Compliance, which regulated rental housing in the city, and could offer us some assistance as to whether or not a property was certified and registered as a rental. And we also had Capital Area Community Services for some help with financial literacy and help in tax foreclosure properties. And so you'll see a link on this that includes this little box regarding the decrease in the default rates and the decrease in the eviction rates, and to the study from Michigan State University, not the law school, but the undergraduate university that did a study of our program at Lansing for those 3 months. And there's a link to it on this slide that anybody that is interested can take a look at that data to show how it has been successful as well. And I really want to say that it is very much a program that requires investment from the courts, but also from the whole community. In order for it to work, it truly is interdisciplinary, and everybody needs to be in on it. And it can really be a win-win for all parties involved. And I really have to shout out the staff of MSU Housing and Professor Gilmore, the Holy Cross Services and DHS, Director Holbrook, and our staff in the Lansing office, Christina Corcoran, Mr. Geyer, Jessica Moss, Kyle Jansen, Mercedes Watts, Kristen Milleroff, because it's important to give credit to the people that are doing the work. And I urge anybody that is interested from another legal aid program in the country, give me a call. I would love to talk to you about our programs that we've had in Lansing and Mason. And I think with that, I'm turning it back over to Judge Boyd.
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Rios. We're going to turn over now to scaling up these eviction diversion programs to respond to COVID-19. And I'm going to introduce, again, Sam Buckholder from Governor Gretchen Whitmer's office. Sam.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sam. Just as a little bit of background, I have worked more or less for the governor since she was in the state senate. I was the policy lead on the mortgage foreclosure crisis. So I've worked with her for the last 12 years. And as the COVID crisis was hitting and the eviction moratorium came into place, I was assigned the housing portfolio. And one of the first things that I really did was to pull the band back together that worked on the mortgage foreclosure issues. So I started pulling in a lot of the stakeholders that were involved, the bankers, the landlords, the various lobbyists, and Judge Boyd, SCAO, some of the different organizations, and just started listening. And also talking with the various departments to what programs we had, figuring out that the issue was going to be what happens at the end of the eviction moratorium. And we started planning about that on day one because we knew that the eviction moratorium would hold people in their apartments, but it wouldn't address the underlying concern of how do you deal with the unpaid back rents, and then how much was it and what was the data. So in those conversations, I had a conversation with Judge Boyd where we started to tease out how do we separate out what we sort of loosely refer to as COVID-19 related debt, and how do we treat that maybe a little bit differently than we would treat a typical eviction case or something along those lines. So we started with this idea, but for COVID, these people wouldn't be in this position, and then how do we make it so that we can get a smooth landing coming out of the eviction moratorium. So that was the basic background of what we were looking at. And with that, and talking to the various groups, we wanted to take a look at what existing sources we had in place, and we wanted to create a program that would be opt-in. Michigan has a very interesting political history, and having spent a lot of time in the legislature, a mandated program was going to have problems. So we needed to have a program that would be opt-in, meaning that the landlords would have an incentive to go for a program like this. So that was one of the policy frameworks that we had to figure out. How do we get the money, put it together, and make it so there's an incentive, or as Judge Boyd likes to refer to, a win-win opportunity for this. So the program had to be voluntary in that sense. Once people opted in, or the landlords opted in, we wanted to try and leverage all of the aid that we had available. And we wanted the aid to go towards what I call like the mom and pop landlords. We were looking at Michigan like a lot of places, has an affordable housing issue. And we have some early data from talking with our Housing Development Authority that a lot of our affordable housing, our most affordable housing, is actually these mom and pop owners. And they're being squeezed a little bit by their own mortgages. And we wanted to create a program that would, while not totally be targeted, would give an opportunity to help those landlords, because if they get squeezed too hard, then we could have a later knockdown effect where we would lose more some of the affordable housing that we already have a short supply. But after that, we started talking with our different agencies, and it's interesting. You talk to people on the outside, and they just think of it as state government. You talk to the departments on the inside, and you realize that DHHS and the Housing Development Authority don't always talk real well with each other, but people on the outside don't understand that. One of the things that we were able to do right away was to get the two departments that are involved in this eviction diversion program to be talking to each other. And that gives us an opportunity to leverage as much of the state aid as possible. After that, from a design program perspective, we really decided that we wanted to leverage our existing local structures. We did not want to force something from the top down and be a state controlled program. We wanted to create the facilities that would leverage the various local entities that have the boots on the ground that are doing this service. And then the last part that we wanted to do, and this was really key to the governor's agenda, is we did not want zip code to matter. In this state, it's been a big issue because depending upon where you are, you could really get different treatments as far as an eviction diversion program. And so we wanted to have a program that would have the potential to provide uniformity throughout the state. And that's the basic policy framework. We're in the process of hammering out the details and putting the money into place, but we think that we are going to get a program that will do all of those things. And I want to thank the people who have boots on the ground who have helped to educate me as I've been bringing some of this forward to our executive office. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Judge Boyd.
Thanks, Sam. And we're going to get a little bit of input, one more slide, please, Danielle, from the Governor Whitmer, I guess two more slides. Governor Whitmer's Washington office. Dana Sherry is with us to discuss the types of money that might be available. One slide back. I'm sorry, Danielle. Ms. Sherry.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dana Sherry, and I am the Deputy Director of Federal Affairs for Governor Whitmer out here in Washington, D.C. And so I'll join in real quick to talk a bit about how the state plans to fund our program using primarily federal dollars and those allocated in the CARES Act. So we'll need to allocate funding for the debt relief program and also to additional funding for case management services and legal services. But in short, we plan to fund the eviction diversion program with a combination of coronavirus relief fund dollars and emergency solutions grants dollars allocated by the CARES Act, along with a few other pots of money, both federal and state funds. So let me talk a little bit more about the CARES dollars that we'll tap into. As Danielle mentioned earlier, among several pots of money the state received from the CARES Act, the largest and the most flexible was the Coronavirus Relief Funds, or CRF. The CARES Act put $150 billion into the CRF for states, territories, tribes, and localities over a certain population threshold. The state of Michigan received about $3 billion directly from the CRF. So as many of you know, and I believe as Danielle mentioned earlier, the CARES Act requires that the payments from the Coronavirus Relief Fund are only used to cover expenses that are necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency, were not accounted for in the state budget most recently approved as of March 27th, which was the date of enactment of the CARES Act, and that were incurred during the period that begins on March 1st, 2020 and ends on December 30th, 2020. So we're very grateful for the funds that Congress has allocated for the state, including these CRF dollars. However, the state has about a $6 billion projected hole in our budget over the next 2 fiscal years. And unfortunately, the CRF funds are not eligible to fill this hole. So we're, really hopeful that additional federal funding will come from Congress, as well as some flexibility by which to use these CRF dollars to plug those holes. But in the meantime, we're game planning funds for what we can and should spend our CRF dollars on. So Governor Whitmer's been in negotiations with our state legislature over the past couple of weeks about how to allocate some of our CRF dollars. The legislature will actually meet tomorrow to consider initial legislation. So today I'll speak to our general plan, which still needs legislative approval. As I stated, we plan to fund the eviction diversion program with CRF funds and Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG dollars, with the majority of the funding coming from the CRF dollars. So, as many of you know, ESG funds are administered by HUD and it's used for emergency shelter costs, street outreach, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention. Eviction diversion falls into the latter category, homelessness prevention. So the CARES Act provided $4 billion for HUD's Emergency Solutions Grant Program. $1 billion was dispersed in April using the standard formula that HUD uses to allocate ESG funds. The second round of funding, about $3 billion, was dispersed just last week. The CARES Act directed the HUD Secretary to develop a new formula for the second allocation and give him wide latitude to develop that formula. I will note Michigan did not receive close to the amount that we had expected in the second round allocation, and so unfortunately we're not able to use as much ESG funding for our eviction diversion program as we would like. And so this is going to mean that we'll have to tap into more CRF dollars than originally anticipated. A couple more things. An important point to note about ESG funds is that these funds only allow us to serve households up to 50% of the area median income. In Michigan's Ingham County, where our capital city of Lansing is, this equates to a family of 4 making less than $40,000 per year. By using CRF funds for the eviction diversion program, we can set our own income limits and we're able to serve a more broad population. And another important factor to note is that CRF dollars must be spent by December 30th, 2020. And so that money will only get our eviction diversion program as far as the end of December. We do plan to structure the funding for the program to utilize ESG funds along with community service block grant funds and some state funding sources, which will keep the program going as long as possible. CDBG dollars could also be used here if needed and felt available. And lastly, I'll just say it would be helpful, of course, if a future federal relief package included additional ESG funds and especially additional direct funds for agencies. The CARES Act, which was passed by the House, does include both of those priorities. So thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Judge Boyd.
Thank you very much. So the court's responsibility in assisting the adjudication of these landlord-tenant cases is to provide a framework where the rights of the litigants are protected and the social safety net can attach. In the standard summary proceeding, as I said, it moves quickly. Ms. Rios described it as a little controlled chaos in the lobby as potential, as defendants walk in and meet lawyers and law students who might be able to help them. Well, in the COVID-19 world, they may or may not come into the building. You know, social distancing is going to control the day as to who does and who doesn't come into the building. Our guidance as the court's return to full capacity emphasizes social distancing. So we're going to try and have most of these hearings remote. In the standard landlord-tenant case, most of the defendants are self-represented litigants, and the vast majority of the landlords, the plaintiffs, are self-represented litigants. So how is it that you create a framework where self-represented litigants aren't going to come together and yet they're going to understand their rights and options in resolution of their case? The Michigan Supreme Court issued Administrative Order 2020-17 in an effort. 2020-17, which I will share with you in the chat board, has two basic principles and lots of detail. The two basic principles are first, and you go to the next slide, Danielle. The two basic principles are first, a triaged approach to scheduling. So we heard from landlords early on in the group that Sam convened, as a matter of fact, that they were concerned that the bulk of cases coming in wouldn't be able to be processed orderly. So in response to the landlord's concern, the Supreme Court created a triage system that essentially takes as a first priority, cases where damage to the property, risk to people, illegality is a first priority. And then you just follow that with the oldest debt. So debt that's alleged to be over 120 days old goes next. Debt that's alleged to be over 90 days goes next. And then 60 and 30, you get the point. The idea here is to make sure that the mom and pop, who are only out 2 months, don't have to wait until the end of the process, even though some big landlord's lawyer came in and dropped 100 cases on the court on the first day. You want to, basically, if you can imagine, if we didn't have a pandemic and we didn't have housing moratoriums, the cases would have come in when they were when there was a alleged breach of the contract. So what we're trying to do with the triage is to allow the system to repopulate in the same priority. So if you take the oldest first, you can repopulate the hearing docket the same way as the breaches occurred, the same order. The second main piece of the administrative order is a mandatory pre-trial. I told you at the outset that in Michigan, the summary proceedings, you show up that day in court and you're going to have a trial. So the court ordered temporarily during the COVID-19 crisis, as Sam called it, the COVID-19 debt runs through the system. There will be a pre-trial at the first appearance. Ideally, that's going to be a remote appearance. We've talked to landlords' lawyers and told them they can appear remote. Self-represented landlords can do the same. If not, that's why we said that there'll be a time-slotted schedule. It doesn't have to be one case at every time slot, but you can't have what we call a cattle call, and that's one of the principles from the Council of Chief Justices, Danielle Stein. At the pretrial, it is the job of the court, whether they do it through a judge, a retired judge, a magistrate, or even a trained mediator, is to explain the rights of counsel, and if legal aid is not right there, the flyers to get the hold of legal aid. One of the questions already submitted is, what about people for whom English isn't their first language? In Michigan, each community is responsive to their own community. So legal aid in a community where Arabic is the most prominent second language has flyers in Arabic. If it's in a Hispanic area, they have Spanish. And so the court is ordered to get flyers from their own legal aid and Department of Health and Human Services so that we have flyers in the languages that are spoken in that area. The pretrial is all about informing the plaintiff and the defendant about their rights and options. The case isn't going to end that day. We're going to take a week to allow the social safety net to attach, to allow the contact with the lawyer if he or she's not there in the building, to allow the lawyer to process the case with DHS, to allow DHS and the entry agency to determine if there are state resources available. The plan that Sam and Dana told you about is going to take time. There's options, there's choices. We want people to understand their options, understand their choices before they have to make final decisions. So the order, again, there's great detail attached, and you can find it at that web link. Now that I think about it, there's another link I'll send as well, which is some supplemental guidance from the State Court Administrator's Office having to do supporting detail for the order. You can go to one more slide, please, Danielle. I know we want to get to questions, so Ms. Rios is going to just talk a little bit about what we're hoping to accomplish by the courts. Again, I want to emphasize, the courts don't have a vested interest in any particular outcome. Pick your favorite sports metaphor. The court is the field and the rule book, not the combatants. However, no sport is played fairly, no combat is fair if the rules don't make sense. So if we have 50,000 cases filed in the first 2 weeks of July, the best effort by the governor and the legislature and the money from Congress will fail if the procedural rules do not allow for fair play and support what's going on today. Okay. Ms. Rios, if you want to round us out on the reasons, what we're trying to avoid.
Okay, thank you, Judge Boyd. So just very quickly, even before the pandemic, Michigan was facing an eviction crisis, and I just have a slide here with a link to the study by U of M Poverty Solutions, showing, among other things, that there's a eviction filing for 1 in every 6 rental units. And so it's important to keep that context, even as we face this additional number of evictions. And then, so in response to what you've heard today and the possibility of expanding the EDP programs, legal services is planning, at least in my office, where we're talking about expanding EDP programs, but that it's important to recognize that takes time to set up good programs and to train staff and students used to handling such large dockets and to develop those community partnerships that we've been talking about. And then the funding that they would estimated to be needing $5 million a year to support this kind of program, and that there's a funding request pending. And with specific concerns for rural courts, district courts with special considerations, and that each program will look different depending on location and resources. And that if anybody's interested, we are developing EDP best practices. If anyone would like more information on that, we can skip the next slide. And the key partners we've already talked about, which include the courts, DHS, the Coordinated Entry Agency, legal aid, law schools, and any other community partners that can help with financial assistance for non-payment of rents and help landlords get the money that they are seeking and that it's been adjudicated that tenants owe. How to scale across Michigan? You really want to consider what are your assets and who are your partners. Do you have good local laws? Do you have a large, community foundations? And then also consider what are your barriers? What are the things that you're really going to need to focus on to break through in order to have a successful program? And those meetings should really be called by key partners in each community to really kind of drill down and say, what do we need to make a program like this work? How will we adapt it to our community? And then that obviously, like Judge Boyd said, will look different now that we are in a COVID world, and we've just received the administrative order and guidance from the Supreme Court, discussing the triaged approach and the no longer that will there be catecalls and the express advice on doing remote hearings. And so what will that look like for the programs that, we've just told you about that are successful? And I think that the important things to consider are reducing dockets, staggering the times. Some courthouses that I've talked to are doing remodels to allow for, virtual participation, even when people are in the courthouse, or ways to connect them to resources virtually while they're at the courthouse. So I think that is definitely an important, possibility. Other courts are having tenants wait in vehicles. For our office, we're really advocating for legal services to be virtually on site for landlord-tenant hearings, the same way we were physically on site before, and that courts place us in breakout rooms with tenants that we can then do intakes and then hopefully help resolve the case during the week adjournment after the pretrial. And hopefully reduce the number of cases that are coming back. Obviously, the ones that don't need to be litigated and it's strictly a financial issue. And I think I can kind of wrap it up from there. I just wanted to cover how the programs that we just talked about can adapt, that it's still possible, and it absolutely should be something that our programs are looking to do, while recognizing that it takes time to make good programs and that the funding necessary to do that.
Thank you very much to all of our Michigan presenters. That was really excellent. I'm just going to put my contact information up on the screen. I'm going to attempt to anyway. Well, anyway, my computer is sadly freezing, but my contact just worked. My contact information is below. We will send out an email within the next day that has all the resources that we mentioned today. Although they're hopefully also on the website. But if you have any additional questions or want to be connected to people, please, my contact information is below. And with that, we're going to turn it to questions now for submitting all your questions. Let's start with a question that was asked. If in the diversion program, this is for the Michigan folks, if a lender or a landlord fails to meaningfully participate, is there any consequence?
There's I'd say three answers to the question. First is coming out of the COVID-19, there's going to be an option, as Sim and Dana have described, to incentivize to do that. Second is the landlord who is filing a case for rent probably wants to cooperate. I guess third is if the landlord wants to come in and press their case and get a judgment, and the legal aid providing defense to the tenant doesn't have a defense other than the fact they couldn't pay, then no, it could be a judgment. But it doesn't stop the social safety net from kicking in and paying off the judgment. So in Michigan, the landlord-tenant case, if the tenant comes in and loses, is going to have a 10-day redemption period. So while, and under this system, they could ask for help on the first day, the hearing is 7 days later, the 10-day redemption period takes us to day 17. That provides the Department of Health and Human Services and the Michigan State Housing Development Authority to step in and do their job.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got a series of questions, so I'm going to give you a couple topics and then hope you guys can take them from there rather than point to a specific question. We got a number of questions about how do you handle jurisdictions, particularly in rural communities that might not have as robust of a social safety net of players available, but also how do you handle self-represented litigants who might have either digital divide or other issues with technology.
Well, the Michigan Supreme Court took very seriously its responsibility concerning the digital divide, and the first appearance it can be required remotely. However, if someone fails to appear at that first appearance that was set remotely, it can't be defaulted. In fact, the court needs to mail them a different notice, inviting them to come back 7 days later. So we're trying to build the digital divide by presenting options. And I think that one of the points that Sam made was that it's important to Governor Whitmer that does not have a zip code differential. So whether you are in the digital divide in the rural parts of the state or in the urban parts of the state, we're trying to provide an access to these services. Did you want to add anything to that, Sam?
No, the only thing that I would add is that we're, part of it is the structure of the program, and I didn't really even say that. What we are looking at is taking a structured payment. So once the debt, whatever the remaining debt is, there's the summary conditional dismissal, I believe is your term, is that debt is going to be repaid over the following 12 months. And then that's where the fund comes in, and how much money we're going to basically say to the landlord, you have the summary dismissal here, here's the arrearages, how will you take this up front to forgive the remaining part of the debt, and how much of that haircut is yet to be determined. We're still trying to negotiate it so that we can make the funds go further, but that's the carrot that we're trying to throw, and I didn't mention that earlier, and I should probably put that in here.
Yeah, and I by all means, I don't mean to downplay the digital divide. It's a very serious problem as it relates to participating in a virtual court experience. There's no doubt about that. What we're hoping is that we can do most of these hearings remotely, but at the same time, we're not counting on it. People aren't going to pay a penalty because they can't appear that way. At least that's not the way it's designed. We'll see how the implementation goes.
Great, thank you. So we next got some questions about language access. Specifically, have forms and notices and court message lines and interpreters been contemplated in the plans for rollout?
Well, you'll see, and then I apologize. The first time I posted the guidance, it didn't work. I assume Zach will check me, make sure it worked the second time. You'll see in there that it specifically noted that the court's responsibility to work with their community partners to get flyers from Legal Aid and flyers from Department of Health and Human Services in as many languages as they offer in that community. The current Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court is Bridget McCormick, and Chief Justice McCormick made it one of the first things she worked on as a justice of our court is to shore up our rules regarding the access to justice for folks for whom English is their second language. So our courts are doing a much better job today than they did 8 years ago to provide that access, and it is contemplated in the order.
Great. So our next question, Judge Boyd, is what landlord associations or landlord attorneys or attorney groups were you involved with when you developed the eviction diversion program, and has coordination with the landlord side been as deep as coordination on the legal aid side?
But as Liza mentioned when she was talking about the development of the 55th District Court program, the first public meeting was a meeting for all the lawyers that practiced in the court. There were way more landlord lawyers than I think the 2 or 3 legal aid lawyers. And I think the Michigan State University Law School Housing Clinic may have been represented at that meeting, or they may have joined us later. So I would say that the folks that are local adapted very quickly and got used to it. The folks that practice statewide, there's a lot of places where they don't really have to suffer the speed bump of legal representation for the tenant. And so in a place where the tenant actually has a meaningful right to counsel, it definitely affects their business model and they chafe a little bit. Hopefully, if all the courts transition to effectively providing legal counsel, those problems will remedy themselves.
Great. The next question actually pertains to funding, and it asks, are there state executive agencies allocating any funding to the EDP, any to rent abatement, or towards more legal aid or civil service?
Sam or Dana, do you guys want to?
I can jump in a little bit, or we have, so DHHS has a lot of services. They have what we call our State Emergency Relief Fund, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we're using what existing funding is available. Some of these programs are a little bit, they have higher burdens to get over and they're not as user friendly. And what we're trying to do is use those programs. MISHDA, our Housing Development Authority, and DHHS are working together. They're finding out that there's overlap where they didn't talk to each other, especially on utility bills and some of the LIHEAP stuff. And we're just trying to get coordination, and we're trying to spend down the money that we have. And so there is some skin in the game from the departments. And then the biggest thing is we even put a matrix together from the 2 departments for the local agencies so that they're people who are the boots on the ground know what funding sources are available. And that was surprising that wasn't available prior to this. And it took a couple weeks to get that together. So we're trying to make sure that we're leveraging what resources we already have first.
Thanks, Sam. Dana, anything you want to add, or should I? Okay. So the next question is, what is the cost of filing an eviction in Michigan? It says in Cook County, Illinois, landlords can sink as many as $400 into filing or serving a tenant, which are sunk costs that make it harder to resolve cases without considering attorney's fees. So curious if you could comment on that.
It's cheaper in Michigan. I saw that question on the Q&A board. The standard filing fee in Michigan, there's 2 filing fees really in an eviction case. One is the flat fee if you simply want a possession judgment, and if you want a money judgment in addition to that fluctuates on the amount of money that you're owed. So it's pretty typical for a filing fee in a non-payment of rent case where the landlord is seeking both possession, which is that 10-day redemption period, and a money judgment, which essentially means they're afraid they're not going to make the 10-day redemption period and they still want to have the judgment going forward, to be about $110 to the court. And service is a tough thing, but as I explained at the outset, there's not a high burden on service in Michigan, so that's usually in the $50 range.
Great. All right. This will be our last question, which there seems to be a couple questions, so I will kind of combine them into one, which is, can you address how your specific strategies for operating a diversion program with large dockets, so in bigger, high-volume courts, as opposed to some of the smaller jurisdictions, so cases where you might hear many hundred cases in a day?
And I can certainly understand the question as it relates to some of the data that Ms. Rios, that Liza used earlier. It makes it look like a pretty small docket, but we certainly have had days when there are 2 judges and the total is 150 cases. And the other court that Ms. Rios talked about, the 54A in Lansing, has 4 judges in a heavy, densely populated urban area with those kind of volumes. So that's really just about the level of resourcing. So obviously, if you have a lot more cases, you need to have more legal aid, you need to have more contacts at the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services. You need to have the Michigan State Housing Development Authority field person who's described as a HARA, Housing Assessment Resource Agency. You need to have them there on the ground and under the temporary order from the Michigan Supreme Court, have them easily available during that 7-day period. So one of the reasons that the court went with this mandatory 1-week adjournment is because we believe that this unprecedented level of cases that may be filed in the first 2 weeks of July, it will be impossible in high docket cases to do everything you need to do in the courthouse that afternoon. And so building in this period of time, this work period, if you will, to allow those agencies to step up, to allow the plans that Sam and Dana described to you to kick in, is that adjournment. And I guess one last thought, and that is that the density of the experience in our buildings will be guided by social distance. The message from the Michigan Supreme Court to the court leadership in the trial courts, including limited jurisdiction courts that will handle these cases, is safety first. Social distancing is the #1 rule. So the governor on the engine, if you will, won't be any artificial rule made by anybody. It will be social distancing based on your physical plan.
That seems like a great note to end on. Thank you all very much. On behalf of the National Center and the Conference of Chief Justices and Conference of State Court Administrators, Rapid Response Task Force, I want to thank you all for joining us today, and thank you to Judge Boyd and to Dana